Franco, taxpayers have spent more than $1.5 billion with a B dollars on bonuses for failing bureaucrats since 2015 alone. Can you walk me through what the heck is going on with bonuses for bureaucrats?
Yeah, this is egregious. I mean, the federal government is rewarding failure with your tax dollars. Yeah, and it's cost taxpayers more than $1.5 billion, these bonuses since 2015. Let me give you some of the craziest examples, okay? You'll all remember ArriveSCAM, right? That simple app that launched with a price tag of 80 grand and then somehow ballooned to cost taxpayers 60 million bucks. It became a national scandal, yet the government executives working on ArriveSCAM walked away with $340,000 in bonuses. Carson, let's look at a Crown Corporation, okay? The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, right? They've repeatedly claimed that they're driven by one goal: housing affordability for all. Well, over the last number of years, Carson, you're in Vancouver, I don't need to tell you, but Canadians can't afford to buy a home. Yet the CMHC rubber stamped $132 million in bonuses since the beginning of 2020 during a housing affordability crisis. And let me give you one more example, okay? The Bank of Canada, okay? It has one job: keep inflation low and around 2%. Well, guess what? In 2022, inflation reached a 40-year high. Okay, the Bank of Canada cranked up interest rates 7 times. In fact, the Bank of Canada acknowledged that they didn't hit their target and that they should be held accountable. Well, what did the Bank of Canada do in that same year? It printed up $20 million in bonus checks. Hey, isn't that a crazy way to hold your organization accountable for failing? $20 million in bonuses? Gross.
Well, Franco, like in the real world, where real Canadians actually work hard with their hands to make things, if you miss all of your performance objectives consistently, you know what you get? A big fat pink slip. Seemingly in the government, our tax dollars are rewarding that same kind of failure with big bonuses for bureaucrats. $30 million in bonuses for CMHC last year alone. Meanwhile, young Canadians like me and you, Franco, the dream of home ownership is drifting further and further away. Instead of punishing the bureaucrats responsible, our politicians are rubber stamping big bonuses for them. Keep going, Franco. I think the folks at home need to understand just how our tax dollars are being used here.
Yeah, look, let's go back to that high level figure you brought off the top, right? If you look at bonuses just to the bureaucrats within federal departments, I mean, they've cost taxpayers more than $1.5 billion since 2015. Okay, 90% of government executives get a bonus every single year. The average bonus for those government executives, 18,000 bucks. Now, Carson, you brought up a good point here, which is the fact that they can't even meet half of their own performance targets each year. Okay, so the federal government posts the percentage of performance targets that it meets within each year. Okay, so 2019, they met 49% of their own performance targets. Okay, 2020, 45%, 2021, 48%, 2022, 50%. Okay, 2020,
Hey!
yeah, throw them a party. 2023, 52%. Okay, so over the last 5 years, only 2 years where they met half of their own performance targets. Their best year was 2023, where they met 52% of their own performance targets. Okay, so that's like writing your own tests, barely getting a D minus, and then rewarding yourself with an $18,000 bonus check paid for by taxpayers. It's absolutely crazy.
Right, that is absolutely crazy. And Franco, it's not like Ottawa has a whole pile of cash just sitting around, giant surplus to be dishing out in bonuses. Ottawa's finances are neck deep in the red. $52 billion worth of interest payments on the federal debt this year alone. That's about as much money as Ottawa sends to the provinces in healthcare transfers. It's about as much money as Ottawa takes from taxpayers in the GST each and every year. So in the private sector, if you are missing your performance targets about half the time, if you are overseeing a massive deficit, do you think normal Canadians would get bonuses in that same situation?
No, look, first of all, we're talking about government bureaucrats, right? We're not talking about the private sector. Okay. Why are government bureaucrats even getting a bonus? Okay. Number two, to bring up the private sector, it goes both ways when you're in the private sector, right? If you do a good job, you might get a bonus, you might get a pay raise, you might get to keep your job. But if you do a bad job in the private sector, you're penalized, right? But it looks like all government bureaucrats have to do to get a bonus is show up to work twice a week with their shoes tied. And here you go, right? $18,000 bonus for the government executives. But number three, also, like, in what world does this organization, the federal government, that is more than $1 trillion in debt, think that it has enough money lying around to be handing out bonuses? But Carson, it's not just the bonuses, right? It's not just the bonuses. It's everything, right? The federal government handed out more than 1 million pay raises over the last 4 years. Since 2016, right? The government added 99,000 extra bureaucrats, okay? The government ballooned the cost of the bureaucracy 77% over the last decade. Now ask yourself, are you getting 77% better services from the federal bureaucracy? I think,
No, of
yeah.
course not. And Franco, it's not just us saying that. You actually worked with one of the big pollsters, Leger, to ask Canadians how they feel about that exploding bureaucracy. Can you tell us what Canadians said about that exploding bureaucracy?
Yeah, so here's what the national pollster Leger found, right? They found that half of Canadians say services, federal government services, have gotten worse since 2016. Okay, so the cost of the bureaucracy went up 77%, and yet half of Canadians say services have gotten worse. Right, right. And not just that, right? The poll also showed that more than half of Canadians want the federal government to cut the size and cost of the bureaucracy. Now, this is a huge disproof, I guess, to the union government's or the government union bosses' spin, right? Government union bosses are already playing Chicken Little. They're fear mongering that the sky will fall if the federal government finally saves some money. But what this poll shows to me is a couple things. Number one, Canadians can obviously tell that federal services have gotten worse despite costs ballooning dramatically up. Number two is that clearly adding more government bureaucrats does not mean better services. Okay, so despite what these union bosses are fear mongering, running around, playing Chicken Little, Canadians obviously understand that more government bureaucrats doesn't mean better outcomes for actual Canadians. And number three, this poll shows that Canadians want the Carney government to cut bureaucrats, right? Because you got to cut the bureaucrats so you can balance the bloated budget so you have more room to provide real tax relief for hardworking Canadians.
Yeah, well, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, Franco. Normal Canadians understand that throwing more bureaucracy at the problems Canada's facing isn't making the solution or isn't creating a solution. It's not making the problem any better to hire a whole legion of bureaucrats. Franco, what's the numbers? Something like 99,000 new bureaucrats since 2015? That's
Yeah,
like the
like I,
population. Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, like I said, right? Like the federal government has added 99,000 extra federal paper pushers since 2016.
Right.
Um,
That's
you
like
can,
adding the population of red deer just in Ottawa paper pushers. And of course, adding a red deer worth of bureaucrats isn't making things any better. It slows down the services Canadians rely on when there's another rubber stamp needed to get anything done. More
yeah,
bureaucracy isn't the solution. It's a big part of the problem, even ignoring these mammoth costs for taxpayers.
well, that's the problem, right? It's government bureaucracy that's the problem, not a solution, right? Like, why is every solution that the government comes up with just more bureaucracy, right? Oh, you can't get natural resource projects built here in Canada? Oh, just create a new agency, add more bureaucrats, right? Can't get homes built in Canada? Oh, just create a new agency, add more bureaucrats. But the problem is government bureaucracy, right? The solution is not government bureaucracy. That is exactly the problem here in Canada. Whether it's trying to, get major natural resource projects built or to get new homes built. Like the government is making all this so much more difficult, making it much more harder for us to attract investment because of the onerous government regulations, because of the onerous bureaucracy, because of the crazy high tax burden both on Canadian individuals and Canadian businesses. Now, there's two other stats that I want to point out, okay? Because it's all mind-boggling, it's all such a waste, but like the parliamentary budget officer, okay, the PBO did a report, and it estimated that by 2029, so in a couple of years, the average compensation for a
Okay.
federal bureaucrat. So you look at salary, you look at bonuses, other perks, pensions. The average compensation for a full-time federal bureaucrat by 2029 will be $172,000.
What? What?
Yes,
This is $170.
$172,000.
So right now, my partner's from a town called Abbotsford, just south of Vancouver. I just saw a headline in Abbotsford's daily newspaper that food bank usage in that small suburban town has hit all-time highs, right? More families than ever are lining up at food banks here in BC and across Canada to feed their kids on donated peanut butter, right? Folks are laying awake at night wondering not just how they'll feed their families, but how they'll keep a roof over their head. Meanwhile, you're saying that federal bureaucrats, right, Ottawa paper pushers, staffers in the Ministry of Agriculture or wherever, are going to be making an average of 172 grand by 2029? That is substantially more than your average Canadian family takes
Yeah.
home, let alone your average
Yep.
Canadian worker.
Okay, one more stat because look, we've gone through a lot, right? We've talked about the fact that you got $1.5 billion plus in bonuses going out since 2015. We've talked about the fact that, federal departments can barely meet half of their own performance targets, yet government executives, 90% of them are taking an average bonus about $18,000 a year, right? We talked about the ArriveSCAM government executives taking 340 grand, right? We talked about CMHC doling out bonuses during a housing crisis. We talked about the Bank of Canada doling out bonuses during an inflation crisis. So I got just one more little fact and figure for you, okay? So there are now almost 147,000 federal bureaucrats with a six-figure salary. Okay, not the other perks, not the bonuses, not the pensions. There are almost 147,000 federal bureaucrats now with a six-figure salary. Okay, that is about 40% of the entire federal bureaucracy is taking a six-figure salary.
40% of the federal bureaucracy taking home a six-figure salary. Look, I've toured British Columbia with our debt claw, raising awareness about how much money the feds and province are borrowing. I've spoken to normal Canadian workers. Most of them aren't taking home that kind of money. Most shop floors here in BC don't have 40% of the employees taking home 100 grand or more. But it seems like there's just a massive disconnect between what most Canadians experience and what the bureaucracy does. Franco, you've said this before, but it's a tale of taxpayer have-nots and bureaucrat have-yachts. So what should the Mark Carney government do about this? What should Mark Carney do about the bloated bureaucracy that's costing Canadians big time?
Well, look, there's the easy stuff first, right? There's like attrition, right? So just not rehiring when employees retire or leave. That's what the easiest thing the government can do. There's, ending the bonuses, there's, ending the pay increases, cutting pay. But to be honest, like none of we're too far gone. None of that's going to solve the problem. The Carney government has to fire some bureaucrats. Like that's just what has to happen. I mean, think about it this way, right? If the bureaucracy had grown in line with population growth over the last 10 years, there'd be about 60,000 fewer bureaucrats in Canada or in the federal government, okay? There'd be about 60,000 fewer federal bureaucrats in the government had the bureaucracy just grown in line with population, okay? So that means bringing the bureaucracy back to population would save taxpayers more than $7 billion every single year. So look, pay freezes, attrition, that's not enough anymore. That's not enough anymore because the Trudeau government went on a crazy, out of control bureaucratic hiring spree. So, what does the Carney government have to do? Got to cut the number of bureaucrats. Going to have to fire bureaucrats.
Yeah, Franco, thank you so much. You hit the nail on the head there. Any closing thoughts?
No, just head over to taxpayer.com. We got a bunch of great petitions. One of the ones that are my favorite right now is the petition to cut wasteful government spending, and you can find all of that at taxpayer.com.
Head over to taxpayer.com/petitions, sign that petition, and let us know down below in the comments section what you think about bonuses for bureaucrats who miss most of their own targets. Franco, thank you so much.
Thanks, man.